I want to tell you something that happened 14 months ago, and I've gone back and forth, probably 100 times, about whether I should put this on the internet, whether I should sit down in front of this camera and say any of this out loud, because once I say it, I can't unsay it. And some people in this story, people I used to love, they're gonna know I said it. But here's the thing. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years working for the county roads department out of Bowling Green, Kentucky. I buried my wife, Carol Ann, in the spring of 2019. I've lived alone in this house for going on 5 years now, and in all that time I've learned that silence, the comfortable kind, the kind you wrap around yourself like a blanket because the truth is too cold, that silence is the most dangerous thing in the world, so I'm going to talk. Now listen carefully, friend. What I'm about to tell you is not a story about monsters. I want you to understand that from the start. Because what makes this so hard, what kept me awake staring at the ceiling fan every single night for almost 2 years, is that the person who did this wasn't a stranger, wasn't some villain from a movie. It was my son's wife, a woman I helped move into her first apartment, a woman I sat next to in the maternity ward and held her hand while my son paced the hallway, and the things she did, I still have trouble naming it without my throat closing up. Let me back up. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand how ordinary everything looked from the outside. That's what makes it so devastating. It was a Tuesday in late October. Cold for that part of Tennessee. I'd driven down from Bowling Green to check on the house my son Derek owned in Clarksville. He'd bought it about 3 years prior, a decent little place on Crossland Avenue, not far from Fort Campbell. He'd been living up in Nashville for about a year by then, him and his wife Kayla and their daughter. They were renting the Clarksville house out, or so I was told. The tenant had called about a leak under the kitchen sink, water damage situation. Derek said he was too busy to deal with it, asked if I'd mind driving down and letting the plumber in. I didn't mind, I had nothing but time in those days. Carol Ann had been gone 18 months, and the house in Bowling Green felt like a museum I was in charge of keeping dusted, so I drove down on a Tuesday morning. Stopped at the Waffle House on Wilma Rudolph Boulevard. I always stop there, they know my order, 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, coffee black. I remember thinking the drive was nice. Leaves just starting to turn, sky that particular gray-blue you get in Kentucky and Tennessee in October that I've always loved. I got to the house around 10 in the morning, let myself in with the key Derek had mailed me. The plumber, a man named Roy Hutchins, runs a little one-man operation out of Oak Grove. He was supposed to meet me there around 11. Now here's where I need you to pay attention. When I walked in, the house felt wrong. I don't know how else to say that. I've been in a lot of empty houses. I know what they smell like: dust, stale air, a faint emptiness. This wasn't that. The air was different. Heavier, warmer than it should have been for a house that wasn't supposed to be occupied. I stood in the front hall and I just listened, and that's when I heard it. Behind the door at the end of the hallway, the door that was supposed to be a storage room, I heard a very small sound. It was someone breathing. Now I want to stop here. Because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, call the police, get out of the house. This is a home invasion situation. And honestly, friend, that thought crossed my mind for about half a second. But the breathing, it wasn't threatening. It was quiet. And something about it made the hair on my arms stand up for a completely different reason. It sounded like a child. I walked down that hallway slowly. My work boots on the hardwood floor, every step sounding too loud. The heating vent near the bathroom was rattling softly. There was a cup on the floor near the kitchen doorway, a child's plastic cup, the kind with a handle on the side, the kind you buy at Walmart in a pack of 4. I almost stepped on it. I stood outside that door and I knocked softly and I said, "Hello," silence then, "Who's there?" Small voice, careful, scared I said, "My name is Dennis. My son owns this house." "Who are you, sweetheart?" Another pause, long enough that I started to feel sick. Then the door opened about 2 inches. And I looked down, because the voice was low, because whoever was behind that door was short, and I saw a little girl looking up at me through the crack with the most enormous dark eyes I have ever seen in my life. She couldn't have been more than 5, maybe 6 at the outside. Brown hair, uncombed, hanging around her face. She was wearing a shirt that was too big for her. A women's shirt, a concert t-shirt from some band I didn't recognize, and a pair of sweatpants with holes at both knees. She looked at me for a long time, then she said very quietly, "Are you the grocery man?" I felt that in my chest. I felt that in a place I didn't know I had anymore. I said, "No, sweetheart, I'm not the grocery man. Is there an adult here with you?" She shook her head slowly. I pushed the door open gently. I wasn't going to force it. Lord knows I wasn't going to frighten this child any more than she already was. But she stepped back and let me, and I walked in, and I stood in that room, and I want to tell you something, friend, and I want you to hear this part clearly. If you have ever in your life felt the floor drop out from under you, not from fear, but from a kind of grief that arrives fully formed like it's been waiting for you, then you know what I felt in that moment. The room was maybe 10 by 12 feet. It had been the storage room when Derek bought the house. I remembered helping him move boxes in there years ago, old Christmas decorations, Carol Ann's extra dishes that she'd given him when he got his first apartment. The boxes were still there, pushed against one wall. But in the middle of the room, On the floor there was a sleeping bag, a purple sleeping bag with little stars on it, the cheap kind from Dollar General. Next to it was a flashlight, one of those small LED ones the battery cover held on with a rubber band. There was a plastic grocery bag with what looked like crackers and 2 juice boxes inside it. And on top of one of the boxes, arranged very carefully in a row, were 4 broken crayons and 3 sheets of paper with drawings on them. I picked up one of the drawings. It was a family. Crayon family, the kind every kid draws. Stick figures, big round heads, a house with a triangle roof and a sun in the corner. But there were only 2 figures in the drawing, a big one and a small one. And the small one had words written underneath it in very careful, very shaky letters. The words said, "Me and Grandpa." I didn't have a granddaughter. I didn't know I had a granddaughter. Let me take you back. Let me take you back about 4 years, because that's where this story really starts, even if I didn't know it at the time. My son Derek is 41 years old. He's a good-looking man, takes after his mother, thank God, and he's always been smart. Went to Western Kentucky University on a partial scholarship, studied marketing. He wasn't the kind of kid who gave me problems growing up. Quiet, kept his head down, was never the most confident boy, if I'm being honest, and I say that with love because I know where that came from. I was working double shifts through most of his teenage years, and Carol Ann was the one who held that family together. Derek grew up watching his mother be the strong one, and I think somewhere along the way he decided that was just how families worked. He met Kayla in Nashville at some marketing conference. This was about 6 years ago. She was working for a social media consulting firm, one of those companies that help small businesses build their Instagram presence or whatever. She was 29, ambitious, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately understands the room. Sharp dresser, very controlled, beautiful in that specific way that requires a lot of maintenance and knows it. The first time I met her, Carol Ann pulled me aside in the kitchen afterward and said, "She's going to eat him alive." Dennis. Carol Ann was like that. She saw things. I told her she was being harsh. I was wrong. Now here's the thing about Kayla, and I want to be careful here because I'm not the kind of man who puts all the blame on a woman just because she's difficult. But what Kayla was, what she truly was underneath the Instagram posts and the designer coats and the way she laughed at exactly the right moments, was someone who saw other people primarily as resources. And Derek, quiet, kind, not quite confident Derek. He was her most important resource. He had the stable income. He had the house. He had the family name, and I mean that because Kayla's family was complicated. Her father had been through bankruptcy twice, and her mother was in and out of rehab. And Derek represented something solid to her, something she could build her image on. They got married in the fall of 2018. Beautiful wedding at a venue in Franklin, Tennessee. Outdoor ceremony, string lights, the whole thing. Carol Ann cried through most of it. I danced with her twice during the reception, and she whispered in my ear, "You know I still think she's trouble." And I said, "I know, baby." And I held her a little tighter. Carol Ann died of a cerebral aneurysm the following March. She went to bed on a Thursday night, and she didn't wake up Friday morning. She was 58 years old. I tell you that not for sympathy, though Lord knows I'll take it, but because you need to understand what that did to our family. It scattered us. I retreated into myself, into that house in Bowling Green, into the routines Carol Ann and I had built together that suddenly felt like rituals for a life that no longer existed. And Derek, my boy, he retreated into Kayla. And Kayla was already pregnant. Their daughter was born in September of 2019. I drove down to Vanderbilt Medical Center the day after the birth. Held that baby in my arms for maybe 10 minutes before Kayla said she needed to rest. The baby's name was Lily. I didn't know until much later that Lily was the name Kayla had already chosen for a future Instagram aesthetic. The name was part of the brand. I want you to let that sit for just a moment. The name was part of the brand. In the months after Lily was born, Kayla started what she called a family lifestyle channel. If you're not familiar with that world, and before all this happened, I certainly wasn't. A family lifestyle channel is essentially a family that films their daily life and puts it on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok and builds an audience around it. The family becomes the content. The children become the content. Kyla was good at it. I'll give her that. I'll give her the skill, if not the soul. She had an eye for it. She knew how to make their Nashville apartment look like a magazine spread. She knew how to film Derek looking like a loving husband without him actually having to be present. She knew how to make Lily, tiny, beautiful, dark-eyed little Lily, look like the most blessed, most cherished, most photographed child in America. Within 18 months, the channel had 200,000 subscribers. Within 2 years, they had brand deals, Pampers, a children's clothing company out of Austin, a meal kit service, an organic baby food brand. And within those same 2 years, I saw my granddaughter in person exactly 4 times in 2 years. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I didn't notice. I noticed. Every time I called Derek, the call would be short. Kayla was always nearby. I could hear her in the background. Sometimes I could hear the particular silence that meant she was listening. The visits that used to be regular, the Sunday dinners we'd do before Carol Ann died, those disappeared. When I asked to come down for Thanksgiving 2020, Derek said they were filming a special holiday content series, and that I was welcome to stop by for a couple of hours, but they'd need the house for filming. I drove 4 hours to sit on their couch for 2 hours while Kayla adjusted the lighting. But here's what I want to tell you, friend. Here's the part that I think about now when I'm lying awake at night. I didn't push. I didn't say what was in my heart. I told myself that this was the modern world, that young people had different lives than I understood, that I was being an old man who didn't get it. The truth is simpler than that. I was lonely and I was grieving, and I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose Derek too. I was afraid that whatever thin connection we still had would snap if I put any weight on it, so I stayed quiet. And Lily grew up seeing me 4 times a year. By 2022, the channel had almost 1 million subscribers. They'd moved from Nashville to a bigger house in Brentwood, beautiful suburb, new construction, one of those neighborhoods where every house looks like it was designed by the same architect and every lawn looks like it was installed on the same day. But something changed around that time. Or maybe I started noticing what had always been there. The photos of Lily on Instagram started getting careful. That's the word I keep coming back to, careful. In the early posts, you could see Lily naturally. Mid-law, hair a mess, ice cream on her chin. The way kids actually look. But by 2022, the images were different. Lily was always perfectly dressed, always positioned, always smiling in that specific controlled way that children only smile when they've been told exactly how to smile. And then gradually, Lily started appearing less. Little by little, like a slow fade on a dimmer switch. A post here, a post there. The channel had shifted, Kayla explained in a video I watched later, toward couple content and wellness content, and something she called mindful motherhood, which, as far as I could tell, meant fewer videos of Lily and more videos of Kayla in athletic wear talking about morning routines. In December of 2022, I asked Derek when I could come visit for Christmas. He said Lily had been going through some behavioral stuff, and that it wasn't a great time, behavioral stuff. My granddaughter was 3 years old. I called twice more in January. Derek answered once. He sounded tired in a way I recognized, not sleepy tired, but worn down tired, the kind of tired that lives behind a person's eyes. I asked directly, "Son, is everything okay?" And he said, "Dad, everything's fine. I just have a lot going on." And I said, "With Lily?" And there was a pause, not a long one, maybe 3 seconds, and then he said, "She's fine. She's going through a phase." I told myself to believe him. I drove down to Clarksville that October for what I thought was routine house maintenance. And I found a little girl living alone in a storage room, eating crackers from a grocery bag, drawing pictures of a grandfather she barely knew. Roy the plumber knocked on the front door at 11:15. By that time, I'd been sitting on the floor of that storage room for almost an hour. The little girl's name was Lily. Of course it was Lily. She'd told me herself in that careful, quiet way she had, like she was used to measuring out her words. She said, "My name is Lily Rose." Said it like it was a full name first and last, like she'd practiced it. I asked her how old she was, and she held up 4 fingers and then thought about it and held up 5. She wasn't sure. She'd had a birthday sometime in the fall, and she thought she was 5 now, but she wasn't certain. She was born in September 2019. She was 4 years old, almost 5. She'd been in that room for, and I still don't know the exact number. I've gone over the evidence 100 times. She'd been in that room for somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks. Let me tell you what I mean by that. She wasn't there every day continuously. What had happened, as best I can piece together, and I'll get to how I know this, is that when Kayla needed Lily out of the way, out of the house, away from the content, she would bring Lily to the Clarksville house and leave her. The tenant had moved out in August. The house was empty. Kayla had a key. She would leave Lily in that room with crackers and juice boxes and the flashlight in the sleeping bag. She would leave her alone. For days at a time, Lily told me, and again, I want you to feel the weight of how she said this, in that small, steady voice. She said, "Miss Kayla says I have to stay here and be quiet because I'm not part of the brand. I'm not part of the brand, a 5-year-old girl, my granddaughter." Saying those words, I held it together. I want you to know how hard I held it together, because my instinct, every cell in my body, was to break down. But Lily was watching me, and the most important thing I could do in that moment was be calm, be someone she could trust, be the first adult, in God knows how long, who just sat with her on that floor without an agenda, so I breathed. Slowly, I looked at her drawings. I asked her if she was hungry. She said yes, but she said it so neutrally, like hunger was just a fact of life and not something worth feeling urgency about. And that neutrality broke something in me that I'm not sure I've ever fully put back together. Roy knocked at 11:15. I went to the door and I pulled him inside and I told him quietly what I'd found. Roy is a big man, thick forearms, been a plumber for 30 years, not a man who gets rattled easily. He took one look at me and then he looked down the hall toward that room and I watched the color drain out of his face. He said, "Dennis, I'm calling 911. I said, "Give me 10 minutes first." Those 10 minutes were the most important 10 minutes of my life. I went back to Lily. I told her that she was safe. I told her that my friend Roy was going to stay with her and that I needed to make some phone calls. I asked her if she had a phone or any way to reach anyone. She looked at me for a moment and then she reached under the sleeping bag and she pulled out a small white iPhone, an older model, cracked screen, and she said, "Miss Kayla gave me this. I'm not supposed to call anyone, but I can play games on it." I looked at that phone for a long moment. I did not touch it. Then I told Roy to stay in the room with Lily and to not touch anything. Don't touch the phone. Don't touch the sleeping bag. Don't move anything. And I walked outside into the cold October air, and I called my daughter-in-law, Kayla. She answered on the third ring. She said, "Dennis, hey, now's not really a great time." I said, "I'm at the Clarksville house, Kayla." Silence, not surprised silence, not confused silence, the very specific silence of someone who has been caught. Then she said, voice completely flat, completely controlled, "Lily is fine, Dennis." And I said, also very quietly, "I know she is. I'm going to make sure she stays that way." And I hung up. Then I sat down on the front porch steps of that little house on Crossland Avenue, and I called 911, and I gave them the address, and I told them what I'd found. And then I sat there in the cold, and I thought about Carol Ann. I thought about how she'd said at that wedding reception years ago, she's going to eat him alive. I thought about how I'd told her she was being harsh. I thought about how many times in my life I'd mistaken kindness for wisdom. The patrol car arrived in 8 minutes, a Montgomery County Sheriff's deputy named Torres. She was young, maybe late 20s, but she handled it the way the best cops handle these situations, calm, methodical. She walked into that room and she knelt down to Lily's level and she talked to her for a few minutes before she did anything else. And I stood in the doorway and I watched my granddaughter talk to a stranger with more ease than she'd ever been able to talk to her own mother. Because Lily was used to strangers. That was the heartbreaking truth of it. CPS was there within the hour. I'm going to skip some of the next part, not because it isn't important. It is, but because it involves conversations with my son that are between him and me, and I'm not ready to put all of that into the world. What I will tell you is this. When Derek arrived at the Clarksville house 3 hours later, he'd driven down from Nashville at speeds I don't want to think about. The look on his face when he walked through that door and saw that storage room and understood, fully, what it meant. Abe've seen my son cry exactly twice in his life. Once at his mother's funeral. Once that day, he sat down on the floor next to that sleeping bag, and he put his face in his hands and he didn't make a sound, and I put my hand on his back and we stayed there like that for a long time. And I understood something in that moment that I want to share with you, friend. I understood that my son was also a victim in this story. That doesn't excuse his absence. That doesn't excuse the fact that he let it happen. But grief is complicated, and control is subtle, and there are ways that people can be isolated and manipulated that don't leave bruises on the outside. Kayla had been managing Derek for years, managing who he talked to, what he shared, how he felt. She'd been managing me out of their lives systematically, the short visits, the busy schedules, the filming days that happened to fall on every holiday. She'd built a wall brick by brick, and she'd done it so slowly and so skillfully that neither Derek nor I had ever felt the full weight of it until the moment it came down. That's what narcissists do. They don't build cages, they build atmospheres. Here is where I tell you about the 3 months that followed. CPS took emergency custody of Lily that evening. I was interviewed, Roy was interviewed, Deputy Torres filed her report. Lily was taken to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital in Nashville for a medical evaluation, and I'll tell you the results of that in a moment, but I want to prepare you because it is not easy. Kayla was questioned by police that night. I don't know exactly what she said. What I know is that her first response, and this is in the official record, this is not me editorializing, her first response was to post an Instagram story. She posted an Instagram story saying she needed prayer and positivity during a family health crisis. 50,000 people responded with heart emojis. I drove back to Bowling Green that night in a kind of terrible calm. The kind of calm you feel not because things are okay, but because you've moved past the place where feelings are useful and into the place where work is the only thing left. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table Carol Ann and I had sat at for 27 years, where I'd paid bills and Derek had done homework, and we'd eaten 10,000 breakfasts. And I took out a legal pad and I started making a list. What did I know? What did I need to prove? What would Kayla do next? She would come for Lily. That much was certain. She would hire a lawyer and she would construct a narrative and she would use every resource she had. And she had significant resources given the brand deals and the channel revenue to get in front of this story before it got in front of her. I had 12 hours before that machinery started moving. I called an attorney in Nashville that night, a family law attorney named Patricia Weston, whose name I'd gotten from a colleague at the county, a woman who'd used her in a custody situation 3 years earlier. I left a voicemail. Patricia called me back at 6:45 the next morning. Within the first 10 minutes of that conversation, I understood that I was in a fight, not a conversation, not a family dispute, a fight. And the only way to win a fight is to know exactly where you're standing before the other person knows you're standing there. Here's what Patricia told me to do. First, document everything. Every text message, every call log, every email. The phone records from my conversations with Derek and Kayla going back 2 years. Any written communication where Lily was mentioned. Any evidence that I had asked to see Lily and been denied. I had most of this. Not because I'm organized by nature, I'm a man who keeps receipts in a shoebox and knows it, but because Carol Ann had always insisted on written records of anything important. She'd grown up in a family where things got misremembered or selectively forgotten, and she'd built a habit of writing things down. She'd passed that habit to me, and for once in my life, I was grateful for it. I had texts. I had emails. I had a note from November 2021 where I'd written in my paper calendar, I still keep a paper calendar, called Derek, asked about Thanksgiving. Kayla answered, said not a good time, filming. Third time this month, denied visit. Second, the financial records. Patricia asked me if I had any information about how the channel made money, where it was banked, whether any of the child's appearance was monetized. That one took a little more work. But it turned out that one of the brand deals, the children's clothing company out of Austin, had a public-facing page listing their brand partner families. Lily was listed. Her image was on their website. She had been, in the language of the industry, a content asset. She was 4 years old and she was a content asset. Patricia got very quiet when I told her that. Third, the medical evaluation at Vanderbilt. I want to be careful here about what I share and what I protect because Lily is a real child and her medical history is hers. What I can tell you is that the doctors found evidence of nutritional deficiency. They found evidence of extended isolation. And I want you to understand that is a real clinical finding, that doctors can look at a child and find evidence of inadequate social interaction the same way they can find evidence of a broken bone that healed wrong. They found no evidence of physical abuse, thank God. But neglect, systematic, intentional neglect, is its own kind of damage. It takes longer to see and longer to heal. They estimated Lily had been in inadequate care conditions for a minimum of 8 months. 8 months. I sat in the Vanderbilt parking garage after that meeting and I held onto my steering wheel and I breathed and I said out loud to Carol Ann, wherever she was, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix it. Kayla retained a lawyer, a very expensive family law firm out of Nashville. They were good, I'll give them that. Within a week, they had filed a motion contesting the CPS emergency custody order, arguing that the situation had been misrepresented and that Lily had been in the care of a trusted family member, meaning herself, meaning Kayla, and that the Clarksville arrangement was temporary and consensual. Temporary and consensual, a 5-year-old child, alone, with crackers and a flashlight. Temporary and consensual. I want to tell you something about that moment, friend. When Patricia read me that language over the phone, I stood in my kitchen, and I felt the first real surge of what I can only call clean anger. Not the ragged, useless kind of anger that makes you sloppy. The clear, cold, purposeful kind. The kind that doesn't need to raise its voice, the kind that builds folders. Over the next 6 weeks, I did the following things. I worked with Patricia to compile a complete documentary record of my denied access over 3 years, 22 documented instances. Phone records, texts, emails, calendar notations. I contacted 3 other families in the family content creator space. People I found through a support group Patricia knew of. Families who had dealt with similar dynamics. Parents who had used children for content and then managed those children out of visibility when they became inconvenient. I'm not going to name these people, but their testimonies added context to the pattern. I hired a forensic accountant, a retired IRS auditor named Paul Scheid out of Murfreesboro, to trace the brand deal payments. What he found was this: in the 2 years between Lily's birth and the channel's growth, Kayla had received approximately $340,000 in brand partnership payments. A significant portion of that, deals featuring Lily specifically, using Lily's image and personality, was never reported correctly. There were LLCs, there were accounts, there were arrangements that Paul described in his careful accountant's language as aggressive misclassification of income. The IRS uses other language. I contacted the children's clothing company in Austin and explained who I was and what I had found. Their legal team called me back within 48 hours. They pulled Lily's image from their website within the week, and Derek, my son, the man I'd been terrified to push too hard, sat down with Patricia and gave a full statement. It took courage I'm not sure I fully appreciated at the time. He described years of being isolated from his family, controlled financially, gaslit about his own perceptions. He described being told, on multiple occasions, that Lily's behavior was a liability to the channel and that managing her environment was something Kayla handled. He described driving to work and crying in the parking garage. He described not knowing how to leave. I hugged my son for the first time in years when he finished that statement. I held on to him and I didn't let go for a while. The court hearing was in January. Judge Sandra Holloway, Montgomery County Family Court. I'm not going to give you a Hollywood version of what happened. There was no dramatic moment where Kayla broke down on the stand. There was no speech from me that made the gallery gasp. What there was paperwork, evidence, documented reality carefully assembled over 3 months, presented calmly and professionally by Patricia Weston. CPS supported continued custody modification away from Kayla. Vanderbilt's pediatric team submitted their findings. The forensic accountant's report was entered into evidence. Derek's statement was read into the record. Kayla's attorney argued. Kayla sat at that table in a very expensive coat, and she looked not scared, not regretful. She looked inconvenienced. She looked like a woman at an airport whose flight has been delayed for reasons she finds unacceptable. That's the image I carry from that day. That coat, that expression. Judge Holloway terminated Kayla's parental rights. Let me say that again, because I think it's important to feel the weight of it. Judge Sandra Holloway terminated Kayla's parental rights. Derek was granted full custody of Lily. Supervised visitation only for Kayla, pending a psychological evaluation that her attorney managed to delay for months. The IRS matter was referred separately. The channel, which had gone quiet for weeks, then had a tearful "we're going through something difficult as a family" post from Kayla, was permanently finished as a family platform. The brand deals were dissolved. The Instagram page that had 400,000 followers went private. Then it disappeared entirely. Lily came to live with me and Derek in this house in Bowling Green, the house where Derek grew up, Carol Ann's house, in February. I want to tell you about the first morning. I got up early. I always get up early, old habit. My body has no interest in sleeping past 5:30, regardless of what my brain wants. And I went downstairs to start coffee. And I stood in that kitchen in the gray February dark, and I thought, there is a child in this house. And then I thought, there is finally a child in this house. I made pancakes, not from a mix. Carol Ann's recipe, the real kind, with buttermilk and a little vanilla, the batter slightly thick. I know it by heart now. I've made it so many times since then that I can make it half asleep. Lily came downstairs at 6:53. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock and thought, I want to remember this. She was wearing pajamas. We'd bought her new pajamas. She hadn't owned pajamas that fit, and her hair was a disaster, and she was trailing a stuffed rabbit she'd named, with the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old mister. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and she looked at me and she said, "Are those for me?" I said, "All of them." She climbed up onto a stool at the counter and she watched me finish the pancakes, and she was very quiet. She was still quiet in those days, still measuring everything. And then she said, out of nowhere, very seriously, "You're the grandpa from my drawing." I had to turn away and face the stove for a moment. I said, "I am." She said, "I thought you were real." I said, "I've been here the whole time, sweetheart. I just didn't know where to find you." The healing was not a straight line. I want to be honest about that, because the YouTube version of this story would end with Lily laughing in sunlight and everything resolved. And that is not the truth. The truth is that Lily had nightmares for months. Woke up crying, or sometimes not crying, just sitting up in bed with her eyes open, very still, in a way that was worse than crying. The truth is that she flinched sometimes when adults raised their voices, even normally, even happily, and you'd see her recalibrate, remind herself that loud wasn't necessarily dangerous. The truth is that she had food anxiety that took a long time to address, a deep instinct to hoard crackers and apple slices in her room, because some part of her couldn't quite believe the kitchen would always have food in it. We got her a good therapist, a woman out of Nashville who specialized in early childhood trauma, Dr. Renee. Lily calls her Miss Renee, who has the fish tank. The fish tank is apparently a major selling point. I drove Lily to those appointments for 8 months, an hour and a half each way. I would get coffee from the Starbucks drive-thru. Lily got hot chocolate, and we would drive down and she would talk to Miss Renee for 50 minutes, and then we would drive back. On those drives, Lily started talking, not about the heavy stuff, not usually, just talking. The way children talk when they finally feel safe enough to be boring. The names of the kids in her kindergarten class. What she thought about the songs on the radio. Her very strong opinions about which cartoons were good and which were bad. A running commentary on every dog we passed. I want to tell you, friend, I want you to understand that the sound of a 5-year-old being opinionated about cartoons from the backseat of a pickup truck on a Tennessee highway is one of the finest sounds in the world. I will carry it with me until I die. Derek is still in this house with us. He took a job with a marketing firm in Bowling Green. Took a pay cut to do it, I know, though he's never said so. He goes to therapy too. Individual therapy on Thursdays. He comes home from those appointments quieter, and sometimes he sits at the kitchen table and drinks his coffee in a way that tells me he's working through something, and I give him space. And sometimes I just sit across from him and drink my own coffee and let the silence be companionable rather than empty. We've gotten better at that. At silence that isn't hiding anything. He coaches Lily's soccer team on Saturday mornings. She has approximately no aptitude for soccer. She's enthusiastic and chaotic, and she tripped over her own feet 3 times in the first practice and laughed each time. Derek coaches her team with a patience and a gentleness that I watch sometimes from the sideline and feel something in my chest that I think might be the closest thing to healing I've encountered. Kayla's parental termination is on appeal. Her attorney filed it 4 months ago. Patricia tells me it's unlikely to succeed based on the record. I don't know what Kayla is doing now. I do not follow the Instagram. I do not look it up. What I do know is that she posted something publicly in March. I saw it because Derek showed it to me, said I needed to be aware, a long statement about being the villain in someone else's story and choosing to heal and learning to forgive yourself. It had 40,000 likes. I closed the phone and handed it back to my son and I said, "Let her have that." He looked at me. I said, "It doesn't matter anymore. We have what matters. Here's what I know now that I wish I'd known 5 years ago. I know that silence is not peace. It looks like peace from the outside. It keeps things smooth and undisturbed. But silence, when it's protecting something that shouldn't be protected, is just violence with better manners. I know that trust is not the same as loyalty. I was loyal to my son to the point of trusting his judgment even when his judgment was being controlled. I confused the two. The difference cost Lily years. I know that children understand more than we say and less than we show. Lily knew something was wrong. She didn't have language for it. She was 3, she was 4, but she felt it. She drew pictures of a grandfather she barely knew. She held onto a drawing of a family that consisted of just the two of us. Me and her, because somewhere in her she recognized that I was the person in her orbit who hadn't been weaponized yet. I know that paperwork matters. God, does it matter? Every court date, every CPS report, every piece of documentation, that paperwork was the difference between Lily coming home and Lily disappearing back into a system that could be worked by someone with enough money and enough image. Keep records, write things down, date them. I know that family is not automatically safe. That is the hardest lesson. We are raised, most of us in this part of the country especially, to believe that blood is protection, that family means safety, that whatever happens inside a family stays inside a family, and that's okay because family takes care of its own. That is not always true. Sometimes the threat is inside the family. Sometimes the person your child is most endangered by is standing right next to them in the family photograph. And the instinct to protect the appearance of family over the reality of the children inside it, that instinct, however understandable it is, costs lives. Listen to the children, always, even when they don't have the words, even when they're just being quiet in a way that feels wrong. Trust that feeling, and if someone ever tries to tell you that a child is a liability or a brand risk or an inconvenience or not part of the plan, you run toward that child. You run as fast as you can and you do not stop. Lily started first grade in August. She came downstairs on the first day of school in a dress she'd picked out herself, purple, with little white flowers on it, and new sneakers that lit up when she walked. She had a backpack shaped like a ladybug. She stood in the kitchen while I took her picture and she smiled. Not the managed smile from the Instagram photographs, not the performance smile, but the slightly goofy, squinty, completely unrehearsed smile of a child who is happy in this specific moment and doesn't need to be anything else. I have that photo on the refrigerator. I look at it every morning when I start the coffee. I don't know exactly what the next years hold. I know Lily has work to do, healing work, and so does Derek, and honestly, so do I. I know the legal stuff isn't completely finished. I know mornings are not always easy and that some nights are still hard and that Mr. the Rabbit has been repaired with a safety pin twice now and probably needs surgery again. But I also know that last Tuesday evening, Lily came into the living room where I was watching the game. University of Kentucky. They lost, they always lose. And she climbed up onto the couch next to me and she fell asleep with her head on my arm and her feet tucked under herself and one hand wrapped around my sleeve. And I sat there and I did not move for an hour and 45 minutes. The Wildcats lost by 11. I didn't mind at all. Thank you for sitting with this story tonight. I know it's long, I know it's heavy, but I want you to know that I would not have felt right about telling it any other way. This was not a quick story. It took years and it cost years and the people in it, especially one very small person with a stuffed rabbit and an opinion about cartoons. They deserved for it to be told slowly, carefully, with respect for every detail. If you're watching this and you're a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or a family friend who has a feeling that something is wrong, that a child in your orbit is being hidden from you, that your gut is telling you something your head is trying to argue down, listen to that feeling. Don't do what I did. Don't let the fear of disrupting the peace stop you from asking the question. The peace was not real. It never was. If you're watching this and you're in a situation like Derek's, isolated, controlled, unsure what's real, too tired to fight, I want you to know that there is life on the other side. That people who look exhausted and defeated can become someone's children's soccer coach on Saturday mornings. That it's not too late, and if you're watching this and you're somewhere like where Lily was, and I know that might seem impossible, a child watching YouTube late at night, but I don't know who finds things and how, then I want you to hear this. Someone is looking for you, someone always is. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from tonight. Tell me if you think I did the right thing. Tell me what you would have done differently. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you to pick up the phone, to make the drive, to ask the question you've been putting off, then that's the only reason I needed to tell it. Take care of each other. Dennis,